I would like to ask our first panelist, Kashish Anisha, who's affiliated with Georgetown University Law Center, to say a few words and then talk a little bit about his thoughts, especially related to how we can move the needle faster when it comes to making products accessible, especially related to vaccines and biopharmaceuticals and what's happening related, what happened during the pandemic, and what are the lessons we learned, and what is it that we need to do moving forward. So, Kashish.
Thank you so much, Anil. And at the outset, thanks to the academies for having me at this panel. I think it's very encouraging to see how the academies engages so closely across sectors, including academic institutions and think tanks. So we are convened here today at the cusp of another global public health emergency, mpox. And as you may all know, WHO declared mpox to be a public health emergency of international concern for the second time in 2 years. And this declaration comes just a day after the Africa CDC declared the outbreak to be a public health emergency of continental security. And I mean, to be clear, the overall pandemic risk of mpox currently is low. But I feel this is a fantastic opportunity to reflect on what we have learned over the last half decade and how really to implement it. And given this background, I think it would be fit for me to limit my remarks today to the biomanufacturing sector, specifically vaccines and therapeutics, both during routine and the outbreak times. And I feel that when we're talking about an international cooperation between India and the US, it is equally essential to talk about what both countries can do globally towards improving access to medical countermeasures by scaling up manufacturing capacities. And I mean, clearly the buzzword for the day is scaling up. So I'll just take a moment to describe the exact problem I am focusing at today. The availability of diagnostics, therapeutics, and especially vaccines has defined the inequality in the global response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Much of the vaccine research, development, and the manufacturing capacity, especially in context of the developing mRNA vaccines, is overwhelmingly concentrated in just a handful of high-income countries. Unfortunately, the response to the mpox emergency is following a very similar trajectory. Although both mpox and COVID are a bit different situations in context of the availability and the timing of the vaccines, but since 2022, parts of the world, specifically Africa, where the disease is endemic, is struggling to address the outbreak with the inadequacy of specific vaccines as well as diagnostics. There's already a massive shortage of the supply, and once again, which underlines the need for a decentralized production through diverse manufacturers. There are two broad major areas of access-related issues which were highlighted during the pandemics for the last 4 years. First one is going to be related to the barriers to the use of WTO TRIPS flexibilities, either it's in the form of the waivers of IP or compulsory licensing. And the second, which comes with the realization that even if we talk about IP waivers, it won't really work until unless there is adequate manufacturing capacities and the technical knowledge and expertise available. And that brings me to the importance of technology transfers of not only technology, but rather know-how and skill sets as well. We often undermine the importance of the transfer of know-how and skill sets. And I give an example. Back in June 2021, WHO had commenced the establishment of an mRNA technology transfer vaccine hub in South Africa. In this particular situation, IP-related barriers didn't really exist, but what was the major gap was in the context of know-how and the refusal of some pharmaceutical to transfer the relevant know-how. It's often said that sharing not only doses, but the knowledge is where the difference lies between charity and justice. So as COVID-19 and now as mpox demonstrates, rapid disease identification and effective deployment of vaccines and therapeutics is essential for containing outbreaks wherever they arise, while limiting the opportunities for the virus to mutate over a dangerous variant. Unfortunately, we're already at a point with mpox when the virus has been mutated. So, I mean, we've already talked how India has the greatest number of FDA-regulated drug manufacturing facilities after the US. And the United States government is one of the largest funders of biomedical research across the world. In this sense, India is a manufacturing hub and US is the developer hub. And both these represent a unique opportunity, but at the same point in time, an important responsibility, both domestically as well as globally. I just quickly highlight three areas where I feel there is a scope of collaboration as well as introspection as far as both countries is concerned and the global outlook is concerned. The first, which we have already talked about briefly, is in context of scaling up or expanding manufacturing capacities. As a precursor to effective technology transfer, especially during pandemic periods, it's important to build up quality manufacturing capacities. Both the US and India could work together in establishing a global network of vaccine manufacturers, especially those based in the global south, and making sure that they are even sustainable during inter-pandemic periods. In India itself, there's been a shift in the Indian pharmaceutical sector from an earlier interest in the generic drug production to today, the industry is also keenly interested in developing and manufacturing novel therapeutics, vaccines, as well as digital health technologies. And I think we should take advantage of that shift. I'll give you a really interesting example. So CEPI, which is the Coalition of Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, is working to expand its network of vaccine producers in the global south. Earlier this year, CEPI decided to invest up to 30 million to build up upon the Serum Institutes of India already existing manufacturing capacity. As you know, Serum Institute of India is one of the largest vaccine manufacturers across the world, and it's located in India. With this expansion and investment, the company's existing ability to swiftly supply investigational vaccines for both preclinical and the clinical testing in the face of an epidemic and the pandemic threat would be expedited. That would result in the vaccine developers to timely transfer their technology to the Serum Institute of India in case of an outbreak. So, in a sense, shortening the time taken to manufacture and validate the first batches of experimental vaccines will be the key to enabling a response to an escalating outbreak within just 100 days, which happens to be the new objective of a lot of entities, including CEPI, and embraced by the G7, G20. So both India and the US here are in a unique position to collaborate to expand the global footprint of vaccine manufacturing, and this can be done in various forms. Interesting example again was back in 2022, President Biden announced licenses for 11 publicly owned medical technologies through the WHO COVID-19 Technology Access Pool. Another great example of international collaboration has been a research agreement entered between the National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Diseases and the South African manufacturer Afrigen, which hosts the WHO mRNA Tech Transfer Hub in Cape Town. And both these examples serve as an amazing precedent for NIH for sharing technology globally. Second core area I would like to mention is the review of the terms in vaccine development and funding agreements and the R&D agreements, especially those which have been funded with the public money, be it by the governments or the NIH. So such agreements should have a component of equitable access commitments built in. And this can take various forms, one of them including an obligation of transfer of technology to the 20 of the identified LMIC manufacturers. Other forms of equitable access commitments in this agreement could include inclusive research collaborations, open access data, or the timely publication of results, transparency, even negotiating a tiered pricing framework or reasonable pricing that is commercially reasonable for the developer and one that reflects the needs, including the price sensitivity of low-income consumers. And of course, the entire reasonable pricing should take into account the percentage of the public funding contributed to the R&D. And finally, signing non-exclusive licensing on a case-to-case basis. In the United States, the Bayh-Dole Act requires NIH and other government agencies granting partially exclusive or exclusive licenses to the US government-owned inventions to ensure that the scope of exclusivity is not greater than reasonably necessary. The NIH could, on a case-by-case basis, take advantage of the provisions of the law and can sign non-exclusive or have their exclusivity limited. For example, by omitting LMIC countries from the geographic scope of exclusivity, or by providing that a licensee will have its exclusivity curtailed or eliminated after certain revenue benchmarks have been achieved. I think I'll pause over here in the interest of time, and I hope to talk briefly about the pandemic treaty negotiations in the discussions. Thank you. Back to you, Anil.
Thank you, Kashish. Digitization is going to help with this. So any thoughts? I'll start with Kashish and then Pushpa and Shu.
Thanks, Anil. So, on academic institutions, first, I feel like, of all the stakeholders, they are at a unique position because they enjoy an independent thought process. And I think that should be taken advantage by both the economies. I'll highlight two areas where I feel areas of potential collaborations between India and the US and academic institutions. And this I, of course, speak in context of a law school, since I'm coming from the Georgetown University. So one would be carrying out independent reviews and assessments of organizations and their functioning in context of the goals they have set. And I'll give an example. So we at the O'Neill Institute in 2022 carried out an independent assessment of the equitable access commitment of CEPI, specifically in context of their COVID-19 vaccine development agreements. And even right now, we're carrying out similar independent reviews and assessments. So in that context, academic institutions and law schools working on these subjects can carry out independent reviews and assessments of organizations of both the regulators as well as policies set forth by the industry and the laws and the policies in place in both areas. Second, they can play a significant role in filling the knowledge gap on two areas. One is, as we mentioned, I mean, we've talked a lot about tech transfers, right? Even Dr. Mishra mentioned the need for tech transfers and how India is going to be supportive about it. Dr. Rathore mentioned about establishing tech transfer offices. There's a significant lack of understanding and knowledge about the implementation of the overall aspect of tech transfers, be it amongst policymakers, manufacturers, on even to an extent lawyers. So I think that's, of course, an area where law schools can come in. And second, general awareness of the laws and the policies of both jurisdictions amongst manufacturers. I mean, take the example of Ayurvedic products. In India, Ayurvedic products are registered as a traditional medicine, and there's no, there's no equivalent category in the United States, and it depends on the specific circumstance that a product may fall under the existing categories itself. And a lot of times, the products exported from India and imported into the United States often get confiscated at the borders itself, and that arises just because of lack of awareness of the laws in the US by the Indian exporters. So I would say two things: independent reviews and assessments, and second, filling the existing knowledge gap. Thank you.
Thank you, Kashi.